people.
Okay, I just said to record on this computer. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
If you don't record it on your computer, you don't have to send it. You can just send a link.
But I don't have that link. This saves to a Rutgers link that cannot be shared outside Rutgers, Bob.
I see.
So I've saved it to my computer and I'll find something to put. Okay, great. Thank you for all coming. We got the 8 people who said they would come, except Martin also emailed me that he would come. Martin Sitt, is that how you pronounce his last name? S-I-T-T?
Sitta.
Sitta, Martin Sitta. He sent me an email after I sent that last email to everyone, but I don't see him yet. But well, this is great. I don't know how, if anybody else has an idea about how to proceed, please let me know, let us know. I thought maybe we just make sure to go around and have everyone say something about themselves and about what they'd like to know about others or hear about. And, you know, after everybody kind of introduced their thinking that way, we could proceed from there. Does that sound good?
Yes. Sure.
Yeah.
So we could start alphabet. The first name in the alphabet, last name is Kesselman. We're starting with K.
Really, I've never had the honor of alphabetically. I've not been in contact with any of our groups since our summer in Princeton. We didn't have the handy technology to do so. And I thank Glenn for managing to get us together. Okay, what happened? After Princeton, I went off to Oberlin, undergraduate, MIT. I did a doctorate in economics, became, like a number of you, an academic, professor at University of British Columbia, and then more recently, second university, Simon Fraser University. My interest has ranged from kind of theoretical analysis in the areas of public finance and income security to, in the more latter years, more recent years, policy applications with a focus on Canadian policies. What else? Over the years, I've written probably 150 op-ed articles in major, mainly Canadian newspapers on tax policy, social policy, budget policy, and my share of academic articles as well. And I see a number of you, I don't have my bookcase here, I'm at my cabin. See a number of you have books behind you. I know from Glenn's communication, he has had an illustrious academic career, but I see others with books. I would not be surprised if all of you, most of you, have followed in what I would have expected a scholarly or related profession.
Okay, what would you like to hear from us, Bryce?
One thing is clear, I think we could all easily stay up all night with one another. I mean, everything that we hear connects to something else. I hear about UBC and I remember the wonderful nude beach they used to have. and also there are serious issues to discuss with all this giant mind power here. But I have no practical suggestion about what we should specifically do next.
Let's so alphabetically next would be Bob. Let's see what he thinks.
Well, my life has been relatively uneventful except for collecting 60 years worth of books, some of which are behind me. I'm in my 49th year teaching at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where I came after I went to Princeton. I remember Nathan and I were in the process of deciding the weekend of the Kennedy assassination. We visited both Princeton and Telluride House. I've never forgotten that occasion. I went to Oxford after Princeton, and then to Harvard, where I was again with Nathan in the government department. I came back after a few years to do a liberal arts fellowship at Harvard Law School. And I've been in Santa Cruz as a member of the faculty of the History of Consciousness department, and also as a political theorist in the politics department for 49 years. For the 3 or 4 years pre-COVID, I was also visiting for 3 to 6 months at the University of Chicago, where I encountered Nathan. I've been in some touch over the years with Glenn, and then more recently reunited with Sheldon. And I'm very curious about the rest of you. I'm continuing to teach and continuing to write. I just published a book this year on financialization and political theory, and I'm happy to talk about anything anyone wants to talk about.
But you did have an eventful life, Bob. You had a long marriage and some.
And I've just remarried 2 years ago. So yes, both of my wives have been Indian, so I've been back and forth to India. Yes.
I remember you invited me and my first wife to your wedding. That is your first wedding. And I remember a wonderful Chinese banquet there. So
yes, that was when we were all in graduate school. But yes, you were at Harvard then too, of course.
yeah, for a moment, yeah.
I was at that wedding too.
Ah,
Nathan was there too.
A Hindu wedding.
Hindu wedding.
I remember you had a couple different ceremonies, but what I remember most was the food. It was wonderful.
I don't remember much because somebody wrapped a turban around my head, so I couldn't hear.
Well, let's see who's next alphabetically. Mark, Peter.
I am. Yeah, my wife is also from India. What is going on here? I should explain that. Well, I had a very, very happy life until about exactly a year ago, when I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And that's why I asked for the chat in case I couldn't go on with the usual way that we speak to each other. But in my happy life, I basically taught in liberal arts colleges, mostly Mount Holyoke. I taught physics and mathematics, and I gradually became more and more fascinated with Galileo. So if you Google me, what you find is mostly stuff about Galileo, which continues to fascinate me. And I'll leave that to the chat. Oh, I better put that chat into the chat. You'll quickly find out if you already have noticed, but I'm having a hard time talking. So let me just think if there's something I should leave to the chat, or what I should say now. I think I'd better say now that my happy life ended not with the diagnosis.
Yeah, mine went off already. You got to turn it off, honey.
I continued happily until North last summer with the death of my daughter, who was a history professor at Santa Cruz. So, Rob, you might run in something to do with her.
Yes, in childbirth.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, I didn't. So you've been to Santa Cruz?
Yes, yes, I was there with her.
Okay.
Anyway, that's why I can't really talk. But
That's
I'll shut up.
that was a real awful. That was just terrible.
Awful. It was a freak accident. No, it was inexplicable. Our only child and our only grandchild. But otherwise, happy life.
I don't know. Well, we could talk about it. My first wife, who died 10 years ago, was an obstetrician here, so I might have some. Anyway, but
well, yes.
I have no idea.
If it's something you can tell me, I would like to know, but not now.
Yeah, well, we can talk offline. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry about the commotion. I just got an email from Martin saying that he was trying to get in. He thought he needed an extra ID or something. I don't know what the problem is.
I did have to enter a password to.
Oh, you did?
I did.
You sent us.
That's
Yeah.
what I said. Well, I resent it to Martin.
Sometimes there's just a delay and you get the impression that you have to add more information, but you don't.
Mhm. Right.
That's true of much of life.
Well, the next person alphabetically is Sheldon.
Really? Usually we ours are a little later, but all righty. You know, we're at an age where what really matters more and more. And what we've just been hearing, I remember the loss of my dear wife 10 years ago, Diana, from pancreatic, which is demonic, and the death of my teacher, doctoral teacher, Paul Feyerabend, from a brain cancer. I mean, we've all been through these things, so my heart goes out, and I do believe in God, and I hope God will comfort those who need comforting. My life, well, along with Glenn and Bob and George, I went to Princeton, and I think staying there helped preserve a lot of the TASP memories and experiences, the buildings, some of the events. Professor Smith, we'll all talk about that as we go on. And I majored in philosophy and mathematics at Princeton. Then I went to Berkeley and I got a doctorate in philosophy of science with Paul Feyerabend, who was absolutely intellectually, well, the most influential man in my life, apart from my own father. And I say man, because women are infinitely more influential. Thankful for that. I also, in the years I've taught at Deep Springs 5 times also. So I had a lot of experience in the Nunnian traditions, and I continued some of the things we did during the periods I was at Deep Springs, but mostly I was a regular professor at a regular university, most of that time, the last, 30 whatever years, Stony Brook. And I was in a place called the Department of Technology and Society, and also something called Marine Sciences, because you got to go on to sea. But my stuff is on disputes that involve science that go on for decades, like global warming, nuclear waste, paper versus plastic, COVID, and also in the conceptual foundations and methodological problems in various the various tools that are used to assess or compare, such as risk analysis or life cycle analysis. So kind of applying philosophy of science, which is my official doctorate, to all these kind of areas. Essentially, they let me play and do any damn thing I wanted, which is what I think we were all cut out for. I have two natural children, 3 step children. Let's see. And so I feel I led a life which I was cut out for. I feel very blessed. And I think of us as we happy few. We'll talk about, I'm sure, this in various ways back and forth. Others may have different recollections. But for me, the TASP, it opened new worlds. I was a science geek until I went to Telluride. MIT, Caltech, would never heard of anything else. And here I am sitting in 1915 Hall, where our classes were, hearing Professor George Pitcher, who I maintained contact with for decades, talking about some guy named Wittgenstein. What? And all these new worlds, whole worlds I didn't know about, that opened to me and us, I hope. And that feeling, since then, I've walked around life in a state of constant amazement and wonderment. And I've been very close with Glenn and Bob. Fortunately, we've maintained, there are other friends that I made in the program that I did stay close with for a couple of years. I hope to resume those lapsed friendships, because that resumption can be instantaneous. But this sense of everything you look at, the more you study it, the more surprises you get. Everything. And that everything is interesting, and that intellectually it's like a treasure hunt. And being let loose in the bowels, as Professor Smith called it, I remember, of Firestone Library, where we had those carols. We always do the bowels of the library, the sea floor. I remember this maybe more than some of us because I stayed at Princeton. But this feeling of being on a treasure hunt, and I'll conclude by saying, once some idiotic grant application, they wanted to know what is my philosophy of education. And I said, I'd be suspicious of anyone who had a philosophy of education, but I do know what the best is. And I'm just not saying what they were. I mentioned Telluride, Deep Springs, and Princeton. So I've had the best, and my aim is to pass it on. So that's been my passion as a teacher, to pass on the gifts from our professors, including the Telluride. I'll shut up there.
So I'm next, I think, but I have to start by telling a story about Sheldon, which is about 40 years ago or 35, when I was living and teaching in Lawrence, Kansas. And I think I was divorced already, but hadn't remarried. And Sheldon called up and he said, Glenn, I'm on my way. I'm about an hour away. I think he had a van with, his wife and a bunch of kids. I said, you're late for the meal. I just had a huge meal here, and I invited some students and people, and we were just eating. But in fact, we had cooked, twice as much as we needed. And it was still on the table when Sheldon and family got there, and they took care of it. And Sheldon said to me, he said, Glenn, life is a movable feast. And so I'm hearing that again. For Sheldon, life has been a movable feast. I think that's right. Well, I think we've all must, in the times we've been living in, must have had eventful lives. I had a couple kids too, and a couple marriages, and that's what seems most adventurous to me, actually. as far as, profession, yes, I became a professor. Somehow I ended up back in math. Not at all what I intended at any point to be a politician until I kind of thought, but I think, as far as the influence of that summer program, I think it really gave me, well, first it changed my life completely. I was from a small Kansas town and I wouldn't have dreamed of going to the Ivy League, of even applying, and I didn't have any idea about what philosophy was. And I think even though I ended up doing math stat, it's kind of the philosophy of the subject that has always interested me. And I think that philosophy, that engagement in philosophy is what was started in Princeton in that summer program. And like Sheldon said, he and I and Bob also here, who ended up going to Princeton, probably kept more connections. We renewed our connections with James Ward Smith in particular and with each other. And that kept some memories alive. But James Ward Smith in particular was a very interesting character to me. And one question I wanted to ask everyone is, when, if ever, did you realize he was gay? That was one question that I would ask everybody. And another question that, speaking of big events in our lives, is how did you deal with the draft? Those are two questions that, aside from what are your great accomplishments in life and so on. Next alphabetically is Dan Salter.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I took a different course. I went to UC Berkeley and graduated with a degree in individual major in folklore and mythology, which proved to be the perfect preparation for Harvard Law School. And when I got my degree there, I headed out to Hawaii. 6 months later, I dropped out for good and all, and I've been out ever since. The past 50 years, I've been living on 24 acres of forest in Western Sonoma County. And over that time, about half of my time has been spent stewarding the forest, about a quarter of my time doing paying work as a kind of a legal ghostwriter, and the other fourth on music, on chamber music and early vocal music. Let's see. Still with my wife of 42 years. I've been able, I live mostly on Social Security, but I've been able to go to all my kids' soccer games. So I'm pretty much content with how things have gone.
How is the wildfire issue where you are?
At the wildfire, it's dreadful. I'm in a redwood Douglas fir forest, and we have not been involved in these holocausts, but we're very much at risk. My wife and I have been spending the past several months working in the forest, reducing the fuel load on the forest floor by doing our own burning before Mother Nature gets around to it. And that's pretty much all that we can do. We're very seriously affected by it.
You had to evacuate.
Yes, we've had to evacuate, although I'm not sure I will do that again.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Well, Nathan, you're...
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks, Glenn, for doing this. It is the most extraordinary event since my 6th grade reunion a few years ago. In person. I had never heard of a 6th grade reunion, but 2 women, I almost said girls, managed to find 30 of us and reunite us in a restaurant in New York. And as there, I'm suffering from a kind of double vision where I'm trying to connect the people I see in these Zoom boxes to my recollections of them at 16. Fascinating. And memories come back. I remember Sheldon playing Wagner for us and things like that. But this is wonderful. let's see. So I thought that James Ward Smith thought I was cute. And I assumed that that was one reason why Princeton gave me a university scholarship, which I declined after visiting, and went to Telluride at Cornell. And spent most of those 4 years in Telluride House, where Martin also was. Got a PhD in political science at Harvard, was on the faculty there for a few years. And then in 1977, which is 40x years ago, some of you mathematicians can do that arithmetic for me, came to the University of Chicago, originally in the political science department, more recently on the Committee on Social Thought, where I've basically been able to teach whatever I felt like, and have done stuck somewhat to my old canon of political theory, but also taught Boccaccio and early American novels and other things, and serve on dissertation committees that I don't know anything about, which is good for humility. Some of you, certainly Bob, met my wife, Susan. We met, I guess, about a year after Telluride. We had gone to high school together, but never met in our class of 900 at Bronx Science. And we're still married. We've had 3 children who've had some long-term relationships, but no marriages, no grandchildren. One is an academic at McGill teaching Japanese culture. One is in New York as a videographer while writing her novel. And one is in Richmond hanging out with his girlfriend. I think that's about correct. And they visit us, especially actually during this pandemic, where for a long time, there were about 14 months where we didn't see some of them at all. But we are very grateful that they were reluctant to come and kill us, as they put it. But in these more recent part of the pandemic, when we're all vaccinated, they've come, and it's been good to see them. I think our son is turning up Thursday. I had a major heart attack in 2014, but have basically been well. Both Susan and I had a very mild COVID case in December, and have led it, like I suppose many of you, a very restricted life the past 2 years, living on Zoom. I am now teaching in person, but hold office hours by Zoom. And I'm looking forward to more normalcy. We haven't traveled anywhere during these 2 years, which is in a way the biggest restriction we've imposed or allowed my doctor to impose on us. Anyway, it's just good to see and hear you all.
Oh, great. I just muted for a second to tell my wife to look out the window and see the snow. We've got a big windstorm with snow at the moment in Newark, New Jersey.
By the way, speaking of regal weddings, your wedding, yours and Nell's, of course, I was there. And in the Princeton University, they call it a chapel, it's a cathedral. But that was one of the most wonderful regal things. It's historic.
Oh, well, thank you, Sheldon. That was in 1989.
Well, I was there.
Second marriage, yeah.
But I was there.
So Jeff, you're the last, and I feel very bad about Martin. I think it's my fault that I didn't send him the full information the first time. And I think by the time I've sent it to him, he's given up. So I'm very, if anybody knows him well enough to give him a telephone call, you could ask him to look at his email again. I think I sent him the correct information. Jeff.
I like Nathan, I wanted to thank Glenn for getting in touch with us and bringing us together. It is a strange kind of blast from the past. It really was 60 years ago, which is a significant amount of time. Various things have changed, not only in our lives, in the world. And it's, as I thought about it, as I said to Glenn, I mean, I was sort of embarrassed that I really remembered very few people's names. I have sort of fragmentary memories, and some of them are slightly bizarre. For example, the names I remember your name, Sheldon, and the main reason is that since we were reading Locke and that kind of stuff, people were making puns all the time, and they used to call you Right Reven.
Natural law is what Right Reven says.
Right, and it's I remembered Nathan for various reasons. Nathan's one of the few people with whom I had any contact, not in person, but we corresponded a bit. We both had interests in Machiavelli and the Republican virtue tradition, as I, see it, and so on. And so we corresponded slightly at one point, some decades ago. And actually, I think the only one of you that I saw in person after leaving, I seem to recall, I have this dim memory of being together the year after our summer program in New York City, maybe even in Nathan's apartment, where we were all talking about getting ready to go to college. But since then, in 1986, I had been on the East Coast, and I went to, I was at UC San Diego, and I went and gave some talks elsewhere in California. Wally Goldfrank invited me to Santa Cruz, and Bob was there. And we exchanged a few words, and I gave a talk about Tocqueville's notion of political liberty, and in particular, his notion of political society. And I remember Bob saying that it was interesting, although he didn't consider himself a Tocqueville scholar. And I remember thinking to myself, am I a Tocqueville scholar? I don't think so. I read him a bit. Since then, I've read some more, but and obviously I've had less contact with other people from the program than the rest of you, partly because I didn't go either to Princeton or to Cornell. I remember that summer program I remember it, fondly, and I appreciate it. I thought it was very interesting, but I think it probably had less of an impact on me than some other people. And I did my parents took me on the tour of different colleges. I knew I wanted to go to Columbia because I wanted to live in New York City. So I was telling Glenn the other day, I had this feeling that you get in Chekhov's play Three Sisters. They're out in the provinces dreaming of going to Moscow. That's the way I felt in high school. I was in suburban Washington, but I knew this was the sticks and I wanted to get to the big city. So I went, I guess I've had a sort of eventful life, maybe less than some people, because like most of us, I wound up getting into academic life. So I pursued, somewhat narrower range of possible life courses, but I went to Columbia, and then I wasn't at all sure what I wanted to do. And the way that I got out of the draft was the summer I was graduating, I sprained my back badly, and I was my first thought of how to get out of the draft was I went into one of the intensive teacher training programs to try to teach elementary school in New York. Till I figured out what to do, I discovered that teaching elementary school is much, much more difficult than teaching college. I wasn't cut out for it. I mean, it was an educational experience, not for the kids, but for me. And also I was held up in getting the job because I was suspended at one point at Columbia partly because I'd been arrested during the strike. And so I was in investigations and whatever. But then when I finally got my job, I got medical insurance, and my back was still bothering me. And so I got I got an X-ray, which told me nothing about my sprained back, but the guy discovered that I had this congenital spine defect, which I still remember. It's a lateral displacement of L5 on S1. I had no idea what it meant, but of course it changed my life. And then a friend, I really didn't know what I wanted to do next. I was pretty sure I didn't want to get a job. I mean, I couldn't imagine, I didn't exactly want to become an academic, but I couldn't imagine going into business. I know there are some people who are fascinated by, buying low, selling high, that kind of stuff. Never, I didn't want to become a lawyer. I couldn't work for the government. Not having an independent income, I couldn't be an independent intellectual. I don't write fast enough to be a journalist, but somebody convinced me to apply for a National Science Foundation fellowship, which I got. And a friend convinced me that we should go to England and get a master's there because we could sort of just continue reading generally. So I went to LSE, and then I wound up going to Berkeley, where it so happened I was in the Berkeley sociology department, where the whole structure of requirements and so on sort of broken down, so I could basically read anything I wanted. And one of the things I had always meant to read Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I found a cheap copy, and they had wonderful used bookstores in Berkeley, as anybody who was there then knows. And so I read it, and I realized there was this theoretical argument there that I was unfamiliar with, so I put it together. Anyway, one thing led to another, so I got a PhD in Berkeley, and then my first regular job was in social studies at Harvard. And since then, I've bounced around, and I've taught mostly in sociology and political science departments, some interdisciplinary programs. I've bounced around partly because of different, life experiences. I got married, had to move. I've also bounced around because it was a strange line of work for me to go into, because it turns out I'm very neurotic about writing things, or at least finishing them. I have this embarrassingly well-known unfinished book on the Republican virtue tradition and freedom and community, for which I got a contract back in the 80s, but I couldn't quite let go of it. And I think the thing that seems to be most cited is a collection that somebody else and I put together on public and private in the 90s. So I had this brief period in which I became this international expert on privacy, which was odd because I was really much more interested in the public side of it, but that took me back and forth. So I was at Berkeley, and then at Harvard, almost no one gets tenure there, as you know. So I didn't get tenure, and then I went to UC San Diego, and I met someone, and then I didn't get tenured there either, mostly because I couldn't quite let go of my book. And then I went to the European University in Florence for a year, and my second wife, we got married at that time, was at Smith College in Massachusetts. So coming back from Italy, I got a job in political science at Williams. And then, to my surprise, I spent almost a decade of my life in the small liberal arts college world, Williams, and then Bryn Mawr, Haverford, and so on. And then I taught for a while at University of Pennsylvania. I was in political science and in the philosophy, politics, and economics program. For a while, they wanted somebody to do a course on the history of economic thought, and they couldn't get any economists to do it because none of the economists at UPenn know any history of economic thought, or rather, they don't see why they should, because in science you don't need history, So, so the fact is, I haven't had a regular vision for a while, but I've been lucky. I haven't quite run through all my 9 lives, and I'm still going on. And I also haven't, unlike some of the rest of you, I've been married twice. The second one worked out better than the first. I pretty much knew from my teens that I didn't really want to have kids, partly because, like some people, I felt anyway, I was really miserable a lot at the time when I was young, and I didn't want to be responsible for someone else being miserable. So whether or not this was a sensible reaction, I haven't had any kids. On the other hand, I have taught many, many students over the years, and I've been very lucky with them, and some of them are quite remarkable. And I have long-term relationships with some of them. It's looking back on it, I'm often struck by the fact that we often don't want to recognize what an important role accident plays in our lives. Because I can easily imagine at several points something had gone slightly differently. I could have gone, my life could have gone in a slightly different direction. But anyway, what?
Well, I was just going to ask whether others feel that the summer we were in made a big difference or not.
Sure.
Dan, how did it change for you?
Oh, golly. I didn't know such things could be. I came back and insisted on graduating in a semester instead of taking my full senior year. And that led me on as a midtermer to Berkeley. And things went in a different direction completely at that point. Yeah, I Telluride inspired, the summer program did inspire me. I was a year at Berkeley branch also of Telluride. And that made a difference also.
I didn't know there was a Berkeley branch.
Yeah, let's see, I would have been there in 1965 and 66. I don't know what's happened to it since, but there was a Berkeley branch then. And the only person I can think of from the program that I've seen was Dave Conklin, and I'm wondering what's become of him.
We couldn't reach him. Nobody knew, had any contact with him.
Yeah.
Was he at Berkeley with you?
Yes, he was. I didn't really keep much in touch with him there, and I'm not sure what happened after.
I mean,
I
a couple
mentioned
of things
also,
what happened to me in that sense. I intended to study philosophy, and so I paid a lot of attention to James Ward Smith. But do you remember those after dinner talks that we kindly had visiting scholars? There was one by a physicist named
Lemonick.
Aaron Lemonick.
That's right. Do you know him? I looked.
He was one of my teachers in college too.
Okay. Yeah.
I built an accelerator.
Oh, well, I didn't really know anything about him, but looked up what I could find about a week ago. And he was a very eminent teacher, it turns out. I didn't know him through his physics, but through physics. And I paid special attention to him since I was interested in philosophy, I thought. And so at that point, I thought I'd better study physics first. and there was no turning back at that point. I learned just last week that also Joe, I won't be able to, a Nobel Prize.
Joel Primack?
No, not Joel Primack. He won the Nobel Prize for the. I'm afraid I'll have to stop. I actually know this person. I rented a house from him. Anyway, he was a very influential physics teacher, and that's all I guess I can say.
Well, I think several of us were impressed by Aaron Lemonick, and I never was moved to want to be a physicist. Wasn't my way of thinking, but I was impressed enough with him that I made a point of, as a freshman, taking his general physics course, which I suppose I needed a science anyway. And I still remember his lectures. And the one I especially remember is where he was drawing over the blackboard and he says, here's the difference between the physicist and a mathematician. The mathematician wants to start at one place and go everywhere from there. Physicists doesn't need to do that. They're happy enough to start anywhere and go over there, or start over here and go over there. That's I don't know if that's the way people think about, other people think about the difference between physics and mathematics, but it's stuck in my mind.
There are lots of
had
jokes about them.
You mentioned, I think, Mark, you were the first to mention the talks, I think, and how Aaron Lemonick, I remember that talk, but it didn't influence me in that way, but I remember, first of all, I hope we all remember the evening we spent with J. Robert Open, smoking his pipe in 1915 Hall. I never forgot that. And I've been to all those sites in the West personally, a lot of work I did on WMDs, but I have the one who influenced me, my talk was on this thing called Gödel's proof. I'd never heard of. Professor Smith told me about it. Oh, you got to go check. And I knocked on his door, and it was very nice. And it really, I was thinking of becoming a logician at one point, not for me.
I remember especially your interest in him. I was so impressed with that you were working on Gödel's proof.
Well, probably got me into Princeton as a youth scholar, because present at the talk was not just Professor Smith, but a philosopher of math named Paul Ben Nassareff, who was kind to me for the last 50 years. But I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. They knew it too, but they said, well, this guy kind of belongs in the family. But we remember, I do, and I know Nathan will, the FEH flag, F-E-H.
On Geo Hall, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, there's a story that should have toppled the Nobel Prize for this. This is a true story. Several of us, I think certainly Nathan and I, and 4 or 5, I don't remember who else, but we erected a large flag, big white flag, spray painted with the word FEH on it, like F-E-H, the Yiddish FEH. And we got in trouble with the president of the university, Robert Goheen, who was also kind to me. And the day he was appointed full colonel in Manila by General MacArthur, my father was appointed captain by General MacArthur. But years later, I showed proof of this to Bob. Anyway, so years later, we one of the things we did on top of Geo Hall, we snuck in. We stuck around buildings at all hours. We threw pebbles. The roof was a bunch of little pebbles, and on top of the roof was a giant horn antenna. And this was the experiment. It was partly at Princeton and top of this geology building, and partly at Bell Labs. But this was the experiment that showed the 4-degree black body radiation from the explosion of the universe. This was the proof. And here we were throwing little pebbles into this. So 20-25 years later, I had a chance to meet with Wilson, I think it was. Wilson, they got the Nobel for this. And with humor, I told him this story. And I said, I think really you're going to have to retract that Nobel Prize, our results. So I remember that anyway.
Yeah. Before Glenn, I think, asked about the draft. And in my case, I went for the exam and was found to have a significant heart murmur with mitral valve leakage and things. And just to make sure I got 4F, I lost a good deal of weight. So I was deferred. Then many years later, this would have been in 2006, I did have surgery to repair the leaky valve. And 2 years after that, I met a woman who became my second wife. There's been a lot of talk of two wives. I don't know, and no one's admitted to three, but my second wife had been married to the physicist who actually developed the first ever laser in 1960. So I learned a lot about their life together and about Ted Maiman. And together, Kathleen and I collated and edited his memoirs. So it's published by Springer in 2018 as The Laser Inventor.
Wow.
And my wife had given a number of lectures, invited lectures at various scientific and professional groups around the world about her husband's life and his invention of the laser, which a very interesting twist to my life as well.
Well, I will briefly tell my draft story. And the background is I went to a small high school in Kansas. I had about 50 in the class, and so maybe about 25 guys. I was one of those 25 that didn't serve in the military in one way or another, at least the National Guard. None of them were killed in Vietnam, but I know one of them had a very bad time and, very bad result there, felt like it had really turned his life in a bad way. But in terms of course, people we knew in college, they didn't want to draft us. And to make a long story short, when I finally ended up, in the exam, the doctor looks at my, bunch of other naked guys all around, and the doctor looks at my little sheet where I put down that I'd had athlete's foot. And he said to me, "Do you want to go? You don't have to go." And he marked it for us. So no, they didn't want to draft us college guys, really. It was that was my experience of it. It wasn't, I thought I was going to have to go, but no. Not when it said Bachelor of Arts, Princeton High Honors, no, we're not going to take you.
I have a very different memory of the physical exam. First, they determined within minutes that I didn't weigh enough for my height. But the doctor helpfully said, you don't weigh enough to be drafted, but if you'd like to volunteer for the Marines, they have a special program that'll put weight on you. And I said, no, thanks. And then he gave me this really dirty look that this no thanks was not pronounced with the right tone. So he had a different attitude than your doctor.
In other parts of the country, draft boards had a different attitude towards college people. But the fact that so many college students weren't getting drafted was one of the things that eventually brought down the draft.
And Phil Blair was drafted, whom we really should mention on this.
Who's that?
Who was?
Phil Blair.
Oh, yeah.
Phil Blair? And he went?
And he went. He didn't go to Vietnam. And my roommate at Telluride, Dave Mossner, was drafted and killed in Vietnam. I've seen his name on the wall. He's the son of Ernest Mossner, a very prominent Hume scholar. Some of you philosophers may have read. But that was just so exceptional. On the whole, people like us were, in a way untouched or at a great distance from the harm.
I went to England directly from the Chicago Democratic Convention, where my parents watched whose 25th anniversary it was that week, watched me getting gassed in front of the Hilton, and I was a draft resistor and had a test case, the details of which I could go into, but I was being represented by Leonard Boudin, and worked on the Amnesty International desk on the American side for American prisoners of conscience. And I was called for a physical and wore a three-piece suit and cut my shoulder-length hair, and wrote out all of the things for my test case that I was supposed to be doing, expecting to go back and stand trial. And people were shooting up and so on and so forth and getting taken. I missed my physical when I boarded the Fulbright boat to go to England. And they told me that I had declined to answer the question of whether I had used marijuana or any other dangerous drugs, and that they couldn't draft me unless I answered that question. And I said, here I was not expecting to do a PhD or be an academic or go to jail. But I said I have a Fifth Amendment right not to answer that question, and they didn't take me. So I don't know whether this is a lapse of principle or an expression of principle or what. I was a draft counselor for many of the Americans at Oxford, including the president and so forth. And some of them did resist, and two of them committed suicide. One of them was Bill Clinton's roommate. But I've always felt ambivalent about that. I don't know whether I should have admitted to using marijuana and they would have taken me, or whether I should have admitted to using marijuana and they wouldn't have taken me. About 20 or 30 years later, my supervisor, who was a quite famous political philosopher, claimed to have had something to do with what happened, but I don't know whether that's true or not.
I took a different route to getting out of drafted by blowing up my left hand in a chemistry high school lab experiment the year before Telluride. And so I couldn't possibly assemble a rifle, but I was very active in the anti-war movement in college and in California. And I went to pretty much every major anti-war march. And I have a collection of hundreds of buttons, each button, the Pentagon March, whatever it was, you got buttons. I still have them. And I remember hanging out with Nathan several times. I remember your parents, Nathan, in your apartment on the West 70s. And I thought we went to one or two of those marches together as well. But I didn't have to, I was not draftable, automatic 4F. I also remember nice memories. I know Bob and I, we drove up to Telluride House a couple of times on Route 17. It took forever. And I think Isaac Bashevis Singer was in residence, Francis Perkins. I had dinner next to Francis Perkins.
Perkins, yeah.
And Marty Perlman, and Paul Wolfowitz. I mean, really, people who made names for themselves. And I've been sort of close to the Telluride House in a way. I have a girlfriend now, and we live together. And about 3 years ago, just before COVID, we happened to drive up in the Ithaca area. And I'm a family member, so to speak, and so we could stay pretty much automatically. And it was nice to renew some old ties, even up there. I won't mention names, but some people, names might mean something to some of us. And one other thing, if I may, about Professor Smith, I didn't know that he was gay because I probably knew there was no such. I didn't know there was such a thing. I remember once he showed me a like a Playboy or something like that, and he opened to the centerfold, And it said, oh, it's a picture of a woman having an orgasm. I'd never felt he was trying to recruit me. I never felt he was trying to see if I was interested in women. I mean, I never had any, anything at all inappropriate, that even if it would have been inappropriate. I wasn't completely unaware of this. However, he was very kind to me at Princeton and to my parents when I had a problem with Princeton. And I would go to a reunion, like reunions or something. And I got to spend some time with him and his partner, and got to know them both. I don't mean close friends, except for Professor Smith. And one thing I didn't know about Professor Smith, and I want to ask if any of the rest of us did, he was a major figure in the United States Navy in the Second World War. He was a beach master at the invasion of Peleliu and at the invasion of Saipan. And these are 1,000-ship invasions of our mighty Navy. And to be a beach master, an invasion like D-Day might have had 6 beach masters, so they would have 2 or 3 for these. But he was in charge of, okay, send in this ship now, they need more artillery cover here. He basically managed the invasion. And I had no inkling that he was in war. And he had prepared, Professor Smith, about a 20-30 page hand-typed memorandum recollections of this, which he gave to me. And I still have them. And I would like to, I don't know if it's up to me to publicize them. He gave them to me, didn't say confidence or not, but hey, it was personal. And so I don't know what to do with them, but I remember that when he died at Princeton, I happened to be teaching at Deep Springs. And Professor Smith, had himself taught at Deep Springs in 1952 or 3, which we didn't know.
Well, Sheldon, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with, you've got to deposit those somewhere. Princeton might have an archive that would accept.
Well, I'll talk. Let's come back to that in a second. I just want to finish this little story and then I'm going to shut up. But when he died, I got the Deep Spring students and faculty and family together, not 30-40 people. And it wasn't a service, it was not a religious service, but it was a memorial to him. And I just told them about this professor, what he was like, his connection to Telluride and stuff like that, his role in the war. And I did so simultaneous with the actual memorial service at the Princeton University chapel on purpose. I did that anyway. So yeah, Glenn, you're right. Let's all figure out what the hell to do with it.
He did call himself.
Can I ask a Deep Springs question?
Martin got here.
Oh,
Martin,
what years were you at Deep Springs?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it was 5 different times.
Oh, well, I never went to Deep Springs. I was encouraged to apply. I remember I didn't really want to go to a place in the middle of nowhere, but over the years, I've occasionally had students who had spent a couple of years at Deep Springs, and one of them is Bill Gorski, who's at Yale now. I just wondered if you intersected with him.
No, that name is
So
not,
let's
What? Okay.
that name's not familiar to me, but it is a tight
Yeah,
family. I mean, it's because it's not so many of us there.
I can believe,
let me apologize to Martin. I think I didn't send you the entire thing at first. I didn't understand that. I apologize, and I'm sorry that you missed our conversation.
so Martin, what became of you?
You're muted.
You're muted.
No, he's not muted.
No,
No, he's not coming through.
Just speak louder. You're okay. Well, Martin has the most authentic looking desk there then.
I computed twice. I couldn't understand what was happening with Zoom, etc.
Well, now we hear you.
Okay, well, apologies for my late entry. Apologies for having missed what everybody said. I'm very sorry about that. In any case, for whatever problems there were, they're over now, temporarily at least.
It has been recorded, so Glenn could make.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you. And if I have anything to say to individuals afterwards, I think I have all your e-addresses.
So tell us about your life and times.
Yeah.
So you're going to get me without my having heard anybody else? Well, whoops. I made my living, as it turns out, not by what I intended to do. I intended to teach political philosophy like some people. Instead, I had more in relation with the mathematicians among you, since I ended up, I thought Charlie Peskin was going to be on here, but I don't see him.
Charlie decided he didn't want to join us.
Okay. Well, I shared some of his math. This math I also had to do. In any case, I started out studying and wanting to teach political philosophy to some extent, like Robert and Nathan. And I was way too perfectionist to finish my thesis. And I didn't treat it as the meal ticket I ought to have. And I then had a short teaching career, and eventually made my way into, in spite of myself, but because of Telluride, I made my way into the financial industry. And I did that for most of my time, taking time off occasionally to do political philosophy, which I have now in retirement returned to, and have started giving talks and hope to continue doing that.
Wow. So how did Telluride get you into finance?
Well, everybody at Telluride, I took the Telluride scholarship to go to Telluride House, and as a result became also part of the Telluride Association, which runs the whole thing. And in any case, everybody at Telluride has a job, and I was assigned the job since people, either undergraduates or recent graduates, tend to invest all the money. I was given part of the job of investing the money. I didn't have any particular taste for this. This was a job assigned for me because I was supposedly a math and science person. So my math would supposedly come in handy. In any case, I was assigned this task and became what they call a custodian. Had to learn some finance, kicking and screaming. But eventually, that combined with math skills, even though I'd given up math, landed me a job with Morgan Stanley. And I did that off and on in various roles. And I'm here now.
Did you know a guy named Dick Bott?
Dick who?
Bott, B-O-T-T.
No.
Okay.
Well, for the last 20 years, I haven't been with Morgan Stanley, although I did, for a while, work for a company which was made by a startup, which was founded in part by former people I knew at Morgan Stanley.
Now, the guy I mentioned is our age. I'd like to ask if anyone remembers Jim Costman, and maybe help locate him. He, first of all, Bob and I and Glenn roomed together my freshman year at Princeton. And then Bob and I roomed like 2 doors apart our sophomore year. And Jim became a philosopher of ancient Greek. Very, just Plato, Aristotle, the Greeks. And it was his passion. And he ran into some personal problems. And he seems to have we had some contact, every 10 years, something or other, but not a word from him. So if anyone recalls anything that might help any of us, find him, see if he's okay. I know that Glenn very much, and me too, and I know Bob feels the same way. We would have loved to have seen him. Those of us who were closer to him, maybe some of the rest of us were equally close to Jim. I don't know. But I just want to raise the question, inviting anyone who has any trail.
What was the last name again?
Kostman, Costman with a K.
Mhm.
I
If I
think
run
he's on the
across it,
memo that Glenn sent us all.
Since I occasionally see things in ancient Greek philosophy, if I run across it, you will hear.
Please.
That reminds me of, again, one of the few anecdotes that stuck in my mind from the summer of '63. I mentioned to Glenn, I remember that toward the end, a bunch of people, including Nathan and Sheldon, as I recall, put together this little skit, which was about the war between the philosopher king and the historian king, which obviously was an allegory on our program, since we had a philosopher and historian. And as I recall, Nathan was the philosopher king. You were wearing a robe of some sort.
Very
And
appropriate.
that's right. And you came, and people came and told you that you were about to be attacked by the historian king. And so you said, well, we have to put together an army, so summon the populace. And your attendants looked at each other sort of embarrassed and said, well, when we were designing the perfect state, we really didn't see any need for a populace. That has stuck in my mind over the years. That applies, it's one of those little things. It applies to so many actual real world circumstances. Populace. I mean, who needs a populace? But anyway, then I wanted to ask a question, which is,
Wow.
in people's little presentations, the little projects that we were all supposed to do, one person wrote something about the pre-Civil War abolitionists, basically making the argument that they were too heavily criticized and were really good people and so on. Was that any of you, or was it one of the other people who's not here now? Because I don't connect it with a name at all. It's occurred to me recently, because that's been part of a general, over the last 60 years, there's been a reevaluation of all that. And I've often wondered who was the one in our group who actually wrote that.
I don't know, but I think your thought suggests another question, which is how studying U.S. reports, actual Supreme Court decisions, affected us. I remember now that my paper was on the Bible reading decision, Madeline Murray O'Hare. But the gift was that ever since, I have read the full text of many, many of the key decisions on both sides, whether it's Scalia or Ginsburg and Clarence Thomas. You can get an education reading these Supreme Court briefs in many cases. And that stayed with me. That never would have happened without telling you. But I actually enjoy reading, the reasoning and history.
Dan, did you have a response to Jeff?
To Jeff, no, I don't think so. I was going to say about James Ward Smith that he called himself First Wave Smith. So it bring up his past to that extent.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Well,
That was during the Telluride program, he said.
Oh yes, I haven't seen him since.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
So what were your guys' impression of these two guys, Livermore and Smith? Dan, what did you think of them?
Oh golly. I don't know. It was my first exposure to a life of the mind, I suppose.
Yeah. One of the people who is not here today, who decided they didn't want to come, said that they found Smith to be pompous.
I didn't feel that.
Yeah.
I just triggered a thought from our summer program together on whatever, Bill of Rights, Constitution, so forth. Much later in my career as an economist, I got involved in some research. This would have been in the early mid 1970s on the issue of mandatory retirement. Now, Canada was much behind the US on this. We did have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that, when was that passed? Long after the US Constitution. It was in the 1960s, I guess. And so questions of discrimination on the basis of age were certainly relevant. I did a couple of papers that may have had some influence on how things evolved in Canada, which actually worked to my benefit because I was going to reach age 65 at well, you can work out roughly the year. I would have been mandatorily retired, but shortly before that, some of the provinces and federally came into line and decided that academics did not become totally brain dead and useless at age 65. I also got involved as a consultant to a group of airline pilots for Air Canada who were fighting mandatory retirement. I think age 60 was being applied to them, which went up to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and in the end, they effectively did win that. So, yeah, I guess my summer, my whatever 6 weeks with you all at Princeton had some long-lasting effect on at least one little bit of my research and my policy activism.
What's the connection between Telluride and this?
Well, Bill of Rights, Constitution.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
It had huge effect on me. Smith introduced me to jurisprudence. He had me write my paper on the Hart-Fuller controversy. And when I didn't go to law school because draft resistors were being kicked out of law school as soon as they were indicted in those days. So I went to Oxford and I studied jurisprudence with Hart and Dworkin and wrote my PhD dissertation and met Bob Nozick at Princeton, who was one of the people who talked to us when he still had a crew cut and a pocket protector. And he was my freshman advisor at Princeton and was on my PhD committee. And I wrote my PhD dissertation at Harvard, sort of constructing a Hegelian object out of Hart, Dworkin, Rawls, and Nozick, with whom I'd studied, and doing what I thought of as a Marxist critique of that Hegelian object. So I guess this had a huge impact on me. And then I remember lots of visual things about you, like Jeff's flip-flops, for example. You still wear. I had never seen flip-flops before, but you wore them every day.
Yes, I got. I started wearing those. I spent some time as a kid in Japan and then Thailand, where I used to wear them all the time. Although, because I first learned about them in Japan, I never called them flip-flops. I still call them zoris. But the answer is, I rarely wear them now, except when I'm near the water.
So when I was thinking about this group, I went back and looked at James Ward Smith's own book, Theme for Reason, and realized that I bought it in college. I still have it, and that I tried to read it a number of times to think, you know, this guy is so influential with me. is there something in there that I need to learn? And I never could quite extract anything. But now, anything that would answer my questions. So I went, and of course now it's so easy to find reviews. You just type in the name of the book at a university library. So I found the reviews that came out when it was published in 1957, and they didn't think there was much in it either. So, but Smith was so I realized Smith's fame was as a teacher. He was immensely respected at Princeton as a teacher, and by the time he retired, it was kind of a disaster for the philosophy department, because his course was responsible for half the enrollments.
I never took it. Did you?
No, I didn't.
No.
He once said to me, there's an interesting question for the 5 of us who were at Princeton, 3 of us who are here now. He once mentioned that to me with a little bit of regret. None of you ever took my course. So why didn't we take his course? Is it because we felt we were too close to him, or was it because we thought we really didn't have anything more to learn from him? That's
I think I remember him asking something to that effect too, Glenn. Maybe we were together when it came up. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't know what either of us may have said, if anything, probably too dumb to say anything, or dumbstruck. You respect what you say, you're a kid. But what I would say now is that we, certainly those of us who are studying philosophy in some sort of professional vein, track, we were led onto other paths, some of them more analytic philosophy, Quine, Davidson, those are people and Bob's case and statistical, probabilistic, that the pressure, I don't know if pressure is word, but it just wasn't on our horizon. It would be more like taking a course in Western civilization. Well, it'd be nice to have, but we don't need this, so to speak. And the other thing I remember about Professor Smith, he used the phrase hot poop all the time. Very excited. I can't do his voice, but it's his voice. The hot poop on this is so-and-so. And I remember in his living room, he had the full Oxford English dictionary. I didn't know there was such a thing. And I mean, it was even before that 2-volume compact thing that we all got with the magazine. And I remember, and we would, he and I, but he would pick it out and consult it. And I remember him posing a riddle, not a riddle, a quiz question, which was, what are the only 2 words in English that are homophones, but opposites?
Yeah.
And I don't know, Professor. Raise and raise were the answers he gave. And this is what I got of years at Princeton.
What are the words? What are the words again?
RAISE and RAZE.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe there may have been others, but
Yeah, there probably are others, but that's an interesting contrast. Yeah.
What was his course that you didn't take?
It never occurred to me to take it.
yeah.
You don't know what it was.
Same
I
here.
think Nathan asked what the course was.
Yeah.
If you didn't take it, you don't know.
Was it a general introduction to
It
philosophy?
was a
and
general
maybe also-
introduction to philosophy for non-majors, and it was,
Ah.
he was famous for flamboyance, and there were such great philosophers, and he wasn't one of them.
Lot. I mean, yeah, I mean, they were, whether it was American, it was very broad.
Did he say anything in particular to you that convinced you to go to Princeton? Or was it just the general good experience?
I can tell you in my case, he didn't have to convince me. Here I was, this geek who only thought of MIT or Caltech, didn't know And I said, Jesus, I'm living here in a fairyland castle of castles. I guess kids today might think of Hogwarts or something, but it looked
Right.
like Hogwarts. And this is great. And I remember the first day I walked on that campus carrying my trunk from the bus stop and totally lost. And anyway, and the other thing for me was that Einstein had been there. And when half of your professors have Einstein stories, seriously, that was a big thing for me. And I was into math and physics, and so it kind of made sense. But it was the beauty. I just fell in love with it,
So Bob, what's your reason?
Going to Princeton?
Yeah.
It was actually Shaw Livermore, not Jim Smith. Nathan and I visited Cornell together on the weekend of Kennedy's assassination. I remember flying out after Jack Ruby shot Oswald, and they took us to Alan Bloom's seminar on the topic was Plato on the inferiority of women. And there were women, including Gayatri Spivak and Barbara Herman, who were sitting in the outer circle. And we were being told that I didn't go to Telluride for this reason, actually, that if you went to Telluride, you could ignore the rest of Cornell. And then I went to Princeton. I don't know whether Nathan went with me. I remember we had Thanksgiving dinner with your mother. Your father had just died, I think. And Shaw Livermore introduced me to people, and there was the U Scholar thing. And it was about how you could intensify your experience of who was at Princeton and what was at Princeton, rather than ignore it. So I chose Princeton, and Nathan, based on the same experience, chose Cornell. But then we visited. I used to come up to Telluride House sometimes with Sheldon the whole time I was an undergraduate, and think I saw Martin there too at some point.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I remember too.
So Livermore was then at Princeton for one more year before he went to Michigan?
He was gone by the time we got there. I think.
Yeah, that's right. I thought so.
I think
But
he had already left.
it was he who took me under his wing and sort of introduced me to interesting faculty there, and it was as though I was going to be going to Princeton rather than avoiding going to Cornell. And so I went to Princeton.
To answer Martin's question on my part, Princeton was gorgeous. And, in that summer, there were no preppies there. So, it was just such a wonderful experience that summer that was just imprinted on me. I didn't know these other places. I didn't have an opportunity, when I was making my decision to visit them, Cornell or whatever. I was admitted to Cornell, but I didn't have the means to travel there. So Princeton is what I had seen, and I thought it was lovely. Of course, I got there were all these preppies. That was a different.
Does any of others of us have a story about why he chose the particular college that he did choose?
I chose Cornell over Princeton, despite taking the same visits that Bob did. I can't fully reconstruct it. A friend of ours was friendly with Philip Roth, who had spent the preceding year at Princeton, and arranged for me to meet him and ask him about Princeton. And he categorically asserted a Jewish boy would not be happy there. Some of you can comment on that. In addition, I had from Telluride free room and board at Cornell, and had won several scholarships from New York State that could only be used in New York State and or at a New York State institution, which
Mhm.
Cornell is both Ivy League and a land grant
Mhm.
institution. So basically, it was totally free.
Hmm.
And that played a role. Since, as Bob mentioned, this was in the immediate aftermath of my father's death, and the financial aspect weighed heavily in the choice.
So Martin, you asked the question, I think.
Yep.
Yes, I did.
And so what were you, how was your choice of college?
Well, I mean, it was a combination of things, but I also got the scholarship, the Telluride scholarship to go to the Telluride House, which financially was not totally amiss. And at the time, I thought I would be going into math or physics, and I was told my father and stepfather had both been physicists, and my stepfather told me that Cornell was the best undergraduate school for physics in the country. And the combination of these things, plus my positive experience with Telluride, I felt the entire vetting process had been very thorough. I had a great respect. I mean, when I got interviewed before the summer program, it was a very intelligent interviewer. I'd had just a very positive experience with Telluride, and that also added to it, in addition to the money.
In my case, I did not choose Princeton because Princeton did not choose me. I did not choose Harvard because Harvard did not choose me. I did not choose Cornell because Telluride House did not choose me. I went to Oberlin College in the state where I'd been born, Ohio, and was, in retrospect, very happy with the whole experience and the result. A few years later, when I was in the doctoral program at MIT, I cross-registered for a course in economic history at Harvard with Hank Rosowski. And he asked me why I didn't go to Harvard for graduate school, and I just mentioned something. And he himself was Jewish, as is my heritage. I think that may have played a role actually in that period in some of my non-acceptances, but I'm not sure of that.
I should add one little thing, since you say Telluride didn't select you. I'm not sure they would have selected me, except for the fact that they were flooded with humanists and political scientists or social scientists. And I was going to be finally, at the one person who was in the mix, who was expected to go into the sciences or math. And so I think otherwise, I don't know if I would have made it.
Yeah, you could have fooled them. You could have.
As it was, I turned, I took math for a year and a half. In the second year, I did take a graduate course, but I then gave it up. The last teacher I had in math was appropriately named Payne.
Well, I went.
Martin, where did you go to graduate school?
What?
Where did you go to graduate school in political theory?
Actually, in Penn State, because of one very good teacher. Really outstanding teacher. I didn't expect to do this, but first I did have an exchange year in Heidelberg, which was very nice. Because not exchange year. They have an exchange fellowship. Harvard and Cornell, Heidelberg and Cornell do, and I got that. And Nathan visited me there actually towards the end of the academic year on his honeymoon.
Oh, wow. I went in the opposite direction of Martin. I ended up in math because after trying philosophy and literature, I thought they were all bullshit. I'll tell you, my freshman year, I took my first philosophy course at Princeton from Richard Rorty. I wrote a paper that was 9.5 pages long, but he said we were supposed to have a 10-page paper. So in the last half page, I wrote a bunch of bullshit. And Rory underlined it and said, wonderful. And then I got interested in French, which I hadn't known any foreign languages before. I got very interested in French. But then the literature was, what was this? And I remember there was another conversation I had with James Ward Smith. Smith told me that when he was a student at Princeton in the 1930s, he won the Shakespeare Prize without reading any of Shakespeare's plays. He'd figured out that that was a mistake to read the plays. You just had to read the most recent criticism.
I remember
we flew to Paris together, Glenn, one summer.
Really? That was when I was thinking about being a French major. Yeah.
You were thinking about being a French major, right?
Yeah. And I would, had a summer stage in Paris. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be in Paris in a couple of weeks. So.
Well, good for you. So you're traveling again.
Yeah, our first venture. I was remembering in terms of Shakespeare, an undergraduate course called Shakespeare, taught by some Shakespearean scholar at Princeton. I can't think of his name right now. But he said, today we have a guest speaker, someone who's going to read from King Lear. And he pulls out, it's John Gielgud. It was unforgettable. It was casually.
It's sort of like the Marshall McLuhan bit in Annie Hall.
Yes, just that's it. That's exactly the image.
Yeah.
Where in Ohio? You said you're from Ohio.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Columbus, born in Columbus, departed at age 1. My father was an academic, a political scientist, so grew up in Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, Akron, Ohio. That's why I asked. That's me.
Oh, okay. Hey.
It's exciting.
Maybe.
You like tires.
I didn't stick around long enough in Columbus to learn.
Actually, I've been trying to think about how I would answer the question that was posed about how one chose where to go to college. I don't actually remember what as I said, I looked at a bunch of places. I think that I was one of the people who applied to Harvard and probably would have gone if they'd accepted me, but wasn't accepted. When I went, at the time that I was at Columbia, the general joke was Columbia was full of people for whom it had been their second choice after Harvard. And that was probably true of a certain number. But I do remember two things. One of them was I knew that I wanted to go to Columbia partly because I wanted to live in New York City. It was, my parents both came from there. I mean, my father from Brooklyn, my mother from the Bronx. They met at City College, one of those things. And then he went into the Foreign Service, and I spent a lot of my time out of the country before I went to high school. But I really thought, I mean, that was sort of the center of civilization. It was where things were happening. It was where, there were interesting things. I don't exactly know how I got that impression, but I know that was my impression. I remember when I went to Williams, I remembered it when I was teaching there later, but I remember going there on my college tour. It looked very interesting, but I thought to myself, this is in the middle of nowhere. I know there's some people who love it there, but I thought, why would anybody, That was part of it. But then I also know that I didn't really know anything about Columbia, but the university excited me. And it was partly because when I went to, one of these nights where graduates would give talks about their places, there's somebody, I think he was a lawyer who had gone to Columbia, who talked about it and made it sound really exciting. I really can't remember why. I think one of the things that I liked about it was the general education program, contemporary civilization, humanities, all that kind of stuff, which in fact, I found very interesting and very useful. And goes back to the comment I made at the end before, that very often it's hard sometimes to recognize how much of a role accident plays in our lives. Looking back on it, Columbia really seemed like it was the perfect place for me to go. But of course, if I hadn't gone to Columbia, I might have felt differently about wherever I did go. I mean, I can remember about certain experiences. There were some remarkable teachers there, and I took several courses that really changed my life in different ways. You know, I mean, lecturers, one of the terrible things that's happened to education over the past several decades is that there's this ridiculous and insane prejudice against lectures, which are often regarded as something close to pedophilia. But when they're good, they really make you think in a way, you know, in a systematic, extended way that you don't get out of other things. And I remember, you know, there were some of my teachers there. I still remember their lectures. I mean, because I hear them lay out these ideas, and they were just astonishing. And then there were some seminars, and then there were one seminar that I took, which really had a big impact on me. My senior year, I took a year-long seminar with Daniel Bell on social theory, in which, in a typical Columbia way for that era, he assigned these vast amounts no one could possibly finish. So we all came in feeling guilty. And then every time we'd come, and he'd make it clear to us how much we didn't know, how little we understood about how we'd written. And I remember I really got a strong sense that there was a vast amount I didn't know, but that it would be really interesting and useful to know some of it. So then I spent the next 30 years, you know, trying to know some of it. But it's looking back, you know, the other thing that's remarkable is how much of an impact certain teachers and mentors can have on someone in ways, not even if you don't wind up pursuing the precise subjects or perspectives that they had. But it's, you know, hard to know what would have happened if fate had taken us somewhere else. But that was, I couldn't reconstruct exactly why I wanted to go to Columbia, but I do remember that I really wanted to go to Columbia. I didn't want to go to Princeton. I don't know why, even though it was a beautiful campus. The other physical memory I have of it, aside from its beauty, was it was the first place I'd seen a lot of black squirrels. All the squirrels in Princeton, it's bizarre what sticks in one's mind, but all the squirrels there were black. I don't know why. And Cornell, I hate to say it, I thought of Cornell as being off, you know, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And I didn't want to go to a small place, which I know they work very well for some people, less for others. But it's, if we're lucky, we make the most of the accidental opportunities we get in life. So in that respect, I guess I've been lucky.
Cornell is one of the most centrally isolated places in the world. You go 200 miles in every direction. You have Montreal. You have you know, New York. You know, etc. It's in the middle. A whole series of cities that would take you forever to get to.
I believe the phrase centrally isolated for Cornell was Madame Perkins's invention.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought I did it independently.
No, you must have heard her say it in your freshman year.
Well, Jeff, I think you have misconstrued the facts surrounding the squirrels of Princeton. Because
serious accusation.
Yes, very serious. As a philosopher of science,
Mm-hmm.
of course, I have spent endless needlepoint weeks studying such questions as all swans are black, not all squirrels are black. And if you'd had gone to Princeton, there was a Thomas Nagel was a teacher there. I think both Bob and I took from Tom, as I recall, but I know I did. And in the urinal, in the philosophy department, in the men's room, if there still is such a thing, at Princeton, there is a bronze plaque. And it says at this spot in the year, whatever it was, Tom Nagel had the inspiration to ask, what is it like to be a bat? And he wrote a very famous paper on what it's like to be a bat. And this event is memorialized if you ever have to use the men's room.
Oh.
So if you imagine what would happen with all squirrels are black. You would add the Nobel Prize for philosophy if there is one.
So he got the idea in the men's room. That's well, it's well known that inspiration hits in the oddest places. I know Weber says somewhere the only time he's had any really important scientific ideas was sitting on a sofa with a cigar in one hand and something to drink in the other, thinking about nothing in particular. But then once you have the inspiration, then unfortunately you have to do the work. That's the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, Glenn asked when one first realized that Jim Smith was gay, and this reminds me of Princeton men's rooms, which had, I mean, it was literally unmentionable at Princeton, which was the place that had no John doors because it was sensitive about being an all-male college. And that made me think when I got there that there was something being repressed. And of course, Princeton had a trustee at that time who was a deputy attorney general named John Doerr. So a bunch of us petitioned that he endowed John Doerr with his
Bob, I remember your discoursing on this very issue in Edwards Hall. Yes, I do.
Thinking about all of that made me think back to what wasn't mentionable about all of this in an all-male school. Yeah.
Yeah, of all things. Yeah.
Of all things.
I was like Sheldon. I didn't have a clue when during that summer. So I guess gradually it was, during college that somehow.
Well, there was one thing that he said, I don't remember in what context, I mean, about being passed over as a president of Princeton because he wasn't married. That was what gave me the idea. I don't remember whether this was a private conversation or a more general conversation, but he had said this, and I was not very alive to the issue in general, but that made me think it.
I never had a clue that he had himself as a possible candidate for that, but
yeah.
Wow. But I mean, having been in that role in the military, he would have himself as a potential leader. But I do remember him talking about how the selection of Goheen had felt like a breath of fresh air because it was one of them. It was one of the young professors that was being chosen.
Yeah, he was a contemporary of Goheen.
Yeah, that generation. Yeah.
I do recall that in the talks that we got that summer, Goheen gave some kind of talk, and I have a dim memory that one of the things he was talking about was that there was going to be a big expansion in the number of people going to higher education, going to college and so on. And the American system of higher education was going to have to find ways of really accommodating what was going to be a greatly increased number of people. And I do remember that I asked him, so is Princeton thinking of, taking in more students and so on? And he said, no, as if, what a bizarre question, Why would we take in more people?
So how did you, we have one deceased colleague who was the only African-American.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned in my email, and I can understand how, I may have mentioned, or maybe I didn't in my email, I encountered him once after Telluride. I went back and visited Princeton in the early 80s. And I went to see Jim Smith, and Jim told me about Costman's difficulties, and he told me that George Cave was now an assistant professor in economics. So I went and talked to George, and George was having a hard time. I think it was clear he was not going to be tenured. You know, I think his situation was. So anyway, the question is, what did it mean to you to have a African-American colleague? Was there anything unusual about that during that period? What was your sense of that? To me, it was, you know, I was, you know, I mean, I don't know that I remember being close to George during the session, but it would have been the first time I was that close to any African-American as a young person.
You asked me about that when we talked, and as I told you, I don't have any memory of having taken any particular notice of that. It wasn't something new or strange to me, but on the other hand, it's one of those things. The whole question of the two issues that have been raised, James Ward Smith's sexual orientation, none of that, at least certainly not that summer. I mean, it never occurred to me, and it's not the sort of thing that I think would have occurred to me unless it had hit me in the face. The question of what to make of the fact that in our group there was only one Black student. I don't remember having thought about that one way or another, and I don't remember.
It wasn't that there was only one; it was there was one.
Well, oh, I see. Well, see, that wouldn't have surprised me. But the answer is I don't have any memories of that. Maybe other people had some kind of took more notice of that than I did.
I grew up with Black kids, so there wasn't anything special about it.
I was certainly very aware of the issue. I think it was just weeks later in August, I went to the March on Washington and heard King. And I went to New York public schools that were 2/3 Black and Puerto Rican. I picketed Woolworths. I was a member of the East River chapter of CORE. So I think it would have been very evident to me, A, that there was one, and B, that there was only one.
The whole issue of civil rights, which came to be associated with the Black-white division in the US, it's sort of interesting that got hit there. That hung over all of us in that era. That was one of the central things. If you thought about politics at all, it was one of, I think for most people, it was one of the things you had to think about and obsess about.
I had a very different relation to the question because having spent a lot of my youth outside the United States, and then coming to Seattle where Blacks were actually quite segregated, and I hadn't seen, you know, I mean, I hadn't had much experience with, you know, the Black question in general. And in fact, on my way to Cornell, instead of going directly from Seattle to over east, I took a trip through the South in order to have, you know, to look at some things for myself, to learn about such matters, because I hadn't really felt I knew very much. And that I ended up at Nathan's house, and we went to Cornell together.
Where were you outside the US before?
I moved to several places. I was born in England. I lived for a little while in the United States. Then I lived in Brazil, Bolivia, Brazil, Israel, Canada. I had to learn 4 languages before I was 10 and forgot 3 of them. So I always had to learn a new one and had no practice in the old.
I had the experience of, I have about a year after I was born, our family went to Madagascar. That was still a French colony. My father had just gotten into the Foreign Service. They had to look it up on the map. it was sort of, the end of the world. But I have one sister who was born there, and then we were 3 years in Mexico. I have another sister born there. But what you just reminded me of was when I was 6 or 7, when we came back to the US, first time I really spent much time, I spoke Spanish about as well as English. And we stayed with my parents, my father's parents in Brooklyn for a bit. And I went to elementary school there. And I even realized it at the time, I repressed all my Spanish. When you're a kid, you really don't want to stand out. There's nothing more rigidly conformist than the peer culture of young kids. And I quickly realized that knowing Spanish made me stick out. So I actually forgot I sort of must have half deliberately done it. There was enough stuck in there that I was able to relearn it fairly easily later. And if I spend some time in a Spanish-speaking country, I get fairly fluent and I can read it. But I do remember that's one of the things about moving back and forth, that it's you pick up languages, but then when you're around other kids who don't speak it, you don't really want to speak it. I was recently talking to some Chinese immigrants in the US who are trying to get their kids to speak Chinese at home, and the kids don't want to. They want to be like the other kids. They want to speak English. They want to be American.
So we have spent 2 full hours. For 75-year-olds, some of us must be tiring a little bit. But if you want to do it again,
Shall we try it in 60 years?
yeah, there you go.
20?
Is that it's supposed to be an incentive, right?
Yes.
I'd like to do it again sometime. I mean, maybe not 60 years, maybe not 2 weeks, but sometime in the not impossible future. I think that would be nice.
I would like to also agree, but I also would like us to make whatever effort we can to encourage those who either weren't able to attend, etc. And maybe if the people who didn't choose to participate but were interested, maybe if they saw the video, I don't know. But it'd be nice to have.
Okay, well, I'll figure out, it'll take me a little while. I'll figure out where I can post the recording that everybody can see. I guess we're all okay with that.
And there's no rush. I mean, just saying.
Yeah. And I will also share it with the non-attendees. There's 3 people I'm in touch with. One of them, Ivan, said he was interested, but didn't get back to me on the time.
Yeah.
The other 2 didn't really want to do it, but they might be curious about the video. I don't know.
And I'm a half non-attendee.
That's right. That's right. So I'll post it, and then if there's one other thing I wanted to mention, and that is that there was a fellow named Matthew Trail, who's a staffer at Cornell at Telluride. And he tried to help me get in touch with some people. I don't think it ended up, they don't have much up-to-date information on anybody except Nathan. So he didn't really help me, but he tried. And he was saying he would like to be invited to this Zoom. And Sheldon and I talked that over and thought, well, no, we don't want to make this look like like we're advertised, I'm sure we'll be on there, anyway, it wasn't for Telluride. So I didn't invite him, but I wanted to mention that. I don't know if we should, and I didn't send all these email addresses to him either, though. I tell you what, I will send him, rather, I'll send you his contact information. And if you want to send him your contact information to update their directory, you could do that.
I do think that, I had met him a couple of years ago, as you know, when I went to the house, and nice. He replaces temporarily Ellen Baer, long time nice young man. And it was kind of him, I thought, to ask to sit in on us. But I don't think it's appropriate. This is just us,
Yeah.
my opinion. And it's, it's not for, it's us, whatever we do or don't. Yeah, so that's just my own feeling. With that we would respond with respect. We really appreciate it, but it's we happy for you.
Okay, so I don't want to, to want to continue, can continue talking as long as they want, I guess. I'm a little tired. If you want to do it again, we all have each other's emails, I think.
Yeah, I have a thought from Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Came to my mind during today. And I was very gratified. It's just wonderfully wonderful to see so many of you, or I should say us, and for something that was signal in many of our lives, if not all, in one way or the other. And, assembling We 16 at Princeton in the summer of 1963 was a coming hither, an ingathering of very quirky minds. And for me, discovering there are other people like me, we're all completely different, but wow. And the Shakespeare that occurred to me was in Lear, I make it, men must endure their going hence, even as they're coming hither. Ripeness is all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like the ripeness somehow strikes me.
Well, I hope none of us become overripe.
Yeah.
I couldn't help
I take it
thinking of
back.
the ambiguities
That
of
was
right.
That was fake news. It was a fake news. I take it back.
Oh,
Ripeness is.
Do it again.
Yeah. No, and thanks again to Glenn.
Thank
It's very, very.
yes.
Very good.
Thank you for doing
Thank
this.
you, Glenn.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
Wonderful to see you all.
Yes.
Okay.
Good luck, everyone. Didn't
Right.
have to talk about Sonoma sometime. I still remember the Bay Area. Nobody really wants to leave the Bay Area, but some of us have to.
So you're in Marin then?
No, I'm in Sonoma County,
Sonoma, where
In the-
in
in-
Sonoma?
Occidental, about 2 miles east of Occidental. So the western part of Sonoma County. Once timber country, then apple country, and now, God help us, wine country.
Where it is. I used to ride my bike up there until quite recently.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
good for that.
good for that. Well, wonderful to see you all,
Likewise.
and
Thank you.
hope we stay in touch somehow.
Right.
Now
Very
that,
good.
now that we
Yes.
can, thanks to Glenn and
All right.
Shelley.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Glenn. Goodbye, all.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Glenn. Good night, guys.